Ready for this SciDF talks about science diplomacy? Yeah! So welcome everyone, and thanks for coming this Wednesday evening to the Residencia de Investigadores of the CSIC here in Barcelona. SciDF talks about science diplomacy, a very actual topic, and therefore we also decided to make live streaming. There are people watching us all over the world. That's also one of the reasons why we do it in English. The live streaming supported by the Marie Curie Alumni Association and Telapolis, who will film it. As also hello to all of us watching from home. Science diplomacy, I won't make a big introduction because for this we have the speakers, a small introduction to our organization. The SciDF Talks is organized by Scientist Dating Forum. It's an organization which we created 2 years ago with the aim of bringing science closer to politics, economics, and society. We do a lot of events in bars, in research centers, social events for scientists, concrete actions, talking to politicians, asking them to present them their scientific program. And today we're going to talk about a political issue, science diplomacy, and a political issue when you internationalize science. Science is per se international, it doesn't have any borders, so it can be used as an interesting tool, as an interesting diplomatic tool. And I'm going to cite quickly the Commissioner of Research of the European Commission, Carlos Moedas, who said, "Science diplomacy is to play a leading role in our global outreach for its uniting power." And then commented in the same speech that science diplomacy can light the way where other kinds of politics and diplomacy have failed. If science diplomacy is only about this, only about peace building, this we'll find out in this roundtable discussion with our 3 speakers. The first one will come later back. What's the story with the first speaker, which isn't here yet? But who better to present those speakers than they themselves? So who are you? Welcome to Casimiro, Vizzini, Montserrat, Daban, and Octavi, Quintana. Short presentation. Who are you? How did it come that you are here talking on a roundtable discussion about science diplomacy, and what is your current function?
So my name is Casimiro Vizzini. I work for UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and I actually work in the natural science sector. And in the last few years, UNESCO has been involved in the science diplomacy programs around the world, in different programs. Specifically, I'm responsible for a program that's called Inside, that is financed by the European Commission through the Horizon 2020 scheme. And I'm here because you've been working with me a few years ago, and you thought it was interesting.
Especially because you are involved in science diplomacy, and UNESCO is strongly involved in science diplomacy, as we'll see later on. And you are the person at UNESCO involved in this. Montse.
Okay, thank you. My name is Montserrat Daban. I am currently working at the Secretariat for Universities and Research for the government of Catalonia. I am a scientist by training from the biological area and a doctor in PhD in molecular biology. But then I shift to communication, so I am a communicator, and I'm currently also the secretary of the Catalan Council for Scientific Communication. But I also have been trained on diplomacy and external affairs. So now currently I am responsible for international relations at the Secretariat and also advising science policies. And why am I here? Because Yoran already invited me to a previous SciD talk, or it was one of the debates or the bar or what, I don't remember, but he remembers that I talked a lot. I just spoke a lot, and then maybe that's why he invited me again, and just make everybody also talk a little bit about that after that.
Well, I am the oldest, so I have a longer CV. But let just me tell you that I'm a physician by training. I did many things, which I'll spare you entering into details. Just maybe the important thing for this meeting is that I've been working at the European Commission as director for research for the last 17 years. I've been chairing also the Council of Europe in everything related to bioethics. And currently, I am the director of a foundation here in Barcelona, Spain, dealing with research and innovation with water, agriculture, and food. And I'll stop here and go.
Perfect, thanks a lot for this introduction. So really interesting panel tonight. So having the global perspective, the perspective of Europe, so the regional perspective of Catalonia. The perspective that is missing is the Spanish perspective, Lorenzo Melchor. It's summer, a lot of flights. His flight had 6 hours delay. He may join us maybe in the last around 8 o'clock, and otherwise after the event there's a networking apéro, and then we'll also go for dinner, and will truly join us for dinner. So if you have any questions to him, you can ask him them, and he sent us also a video message which we will show you afterwards after this presentation. But there are not only us four here, there are also far more people here in the audience, and to interact with you tonight, we have Crisal from our team. Hey Crisal, what's up?
Hello.
Can you create the connection with those people?
Hi everybody. Oops. I'm Crisal, and I'm here today to help, mostly because with Science Dating Forum, what we really want is to get the people engaged with science and to get passionate about science. And today we have a very high-profile panel, so we really want to make them feel warm and welcome. And today I'm here to make you play with these cards. Everybody has these cards? Whoop. Maybe we can get some for this nice guy here? Oh, not really? I will. Okay, perfect. We have it. Thanks. So I would like also to ask you to feel them very warm and welcome. If you can come here and we can feel these 5, 6 first lines, this would be really lovely. I know you are a comfortable seat, but if you want to come here, we really would appreciate that. And we also have Pika Pika for the first 5 lines, so. No, anyway, you are really welcome to come here because today we are close. I don't have anything to else right now, but just start with the questions, right? Okay, so let's gonna start with the cards. These cards, you can imagine for what we will use them. So the first question is, from where do you come from? How did you arrive here? Let's gonna make these cards up. Okay, many people from scientific research. We have the green one. She's this green spot. Okay, perfect. Up in the air, hands up. Okay, a lot of interest. Nice. So, what else we will ask? We go with the second one. Okay, have you heard before about science diplomacy? You are the supermasters, please. The blue one up. Yes, he is the supermaster. I'm the orange one. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, we have potential embassy here. Oh my God, perfect, thanks.
Perfect.
We will continue later.
I think that's always important when you make a speech. The first thing what you learn in science communication is get to know your public, know how to adjust your vocabulary. So the speakers, you are challenged. Now you know who is in the audience, so adapt your vocabulary. We'll start with Octavi. Octavi Quintana will give us a small introduction into the field of science diplomacy in his perspective and his experience on this field. Octavi, as you want, you can do it from your seat. If you want, you can have a mic and walk here around as you want.
But I need to go on with the slides.
I can help you if you want.
Good.
You can give me a signal and. No, nothing so. As you want, you can stand or you can sit. Okay.
Well, almost, yes. Well, go to the first one, please. Yes. So, yeah, thank you. Good, yeah, I hope, yeah. Good. Well, let me first of all maybe do some considerations why science is important for diplomacy, which is the relationship. And to do this, I'd like to start giving a few features on what science is about. Well, first of all, what scientists do is trying to understand, to discover, and to invent. And this is, those are activities for which, unless we share values and the way and some common basis, a common language with other scientists, it is very difficult to go on. So the fact that we have this activity is or helps us to communicate with each other all across not just the country, but also across countries and across the globe as it is. It is science, and I will not enter here into a deep discussion, but is based basically on the rational discourse. And this is very important when you see that many of the conflicts today are very emotional, are based on emotions. And scientists, we try to work on a rational basis. And this gives us a very powerful tool to at least approach conflicts in a certain way. It's not that we do not have as scientists emotions, but when we do our work, what it works is the rational approach to problems, which is not very common, let me tell you, when it comes to political conflicts. Then we share also a universality, as I said, language. We are skeptical, we doubt of everything unless we have evidence, and this is, again, a different way to approach the problems. We are ethically neutral. What does it mean? That we do not have a parti pris, as it were, a special position at the start. We don't make value judgments. We're trying always to go to the facts. And this is, again, very important when you will see what diplomacy is about. And in principle, we do not have interest, as it were, to have one result or another one, but just that we have the evidence that this is the outcome, or being positive or negative on our starting hypothesis. We work in a collaborative way, and in fact, after the cabin crews of aircraft, we are the profession that travels most of all the others. There is no other profession traveling as much as scientists, except, as I say, pilots and cabin crews. And we are global, and because most of the problems that we approach are global by themselves. So this globality allows us to build scientific communities which certainly go beyond any border. And to build this scientific community and all the scientific exercise is based on something which is trust. You trust the others. Of course, they need to provide evidence that what they say is true, but the prima facie, as we would say, we trust each other. And we trust what we do, and we trust that you are using a similar way or a similar approach to problems or to questions as I am doing. So, next one, the collaboration. I will not go very much into that, but I like very much the Socratic approach. That is, Socrates never worked on his own. He always used the meiotic, that is, asking questions to another one. This is the sort of collaboration that scientists, in which science works, with always asking questions and providing answers to these questions. And to ask questions to another one, you need to have a dialogue. You need at least two. And this is the way science works. We want to increase the breadth and the depth of the questions that we are approaching, and today more and more is the way we try to avoid an approach, a vertical approach, and to work in silos. For most of the problems that we have on the table today, we need a transdisciplinary approach. That is the cooperation not just with other scientists, but with other scientists with different background. This is the only way today to do science. And this is very important that this approach is shared by different disciplines. And in the end, the dissemination of the results, we want to have them open, through open science, e-science involving the citizen. Which are the barriers to this collaboration? On one hand, we have the competition that funds in research are allocated by competition, and this prevents scientists to share some part of the ideas. This is a barrier that exists and that is intrinsic to the way we allocate resources among scientists. The second one is bureaucracy. And bureaucracy, I mean many legal barriers which prevent us from working with people of different institutions or from different countries or from different disciplines. Journals, for instance, are usually of one discipline, and therefore it's very difficult to do transdisciplinary science because there are not that many journals that publish transdisciplinary work, transdisciplinary research. They are usually focused, they are vertical and sectorial. And finally, there is a problem of the lack of incentives to work with others, and I can speak about it for hours, but let me finish this here, otherwise I will never. This is a publication of Nature which shows that working together, and this is something that we do much better than the States, that working together we publish more and better. That is, we are at the top, those are the more cited, and we are at the top of the most cited, and those are papers that have been written by people from different countries and from different disciplines. And the collaborative research that, for instance, Horizon 2020 funds or facilitates this, whereas in the States it's very difficult to have programs of the sort. Next, please. This is just to show you a little bit, to illustrate, but this is going to details how we change the share of scientific publications between Europe US and the rest of the world in 2000 and 2013, and here the most cited, the difference between 2000 and 2010. And here you see that Europe, in the end, made it better than the US, but certainly is losing share in benefit, certainly of mainly about China. Next, but we are doing much worse when it comes to products and services, and those are the patterns that you probably know. Next, so I place on the left science, what the science do, and what foreign relations diplomacy does. We are a community of 60 million people in the world that we do science, and we speak the same language of reason. We have the same values of universality, openness, and sharing non-dogmatic views. We have a neutrality, what I said, an ethical neutrality, and we know how to cooperate because we need to cooperate to make science to advance. This is the basis of the message I want to convey to you. If there is one single message, is this slide. And this, you can understand that we can do a lot for the right side, which is the relations among countries that are much more difficult, that certainly do not have any of these messages that I put at the bottom. Yes, next please. So let me go definitions that all is science diplomacy, but can be understood differently according to whatever you think or how do you spell it. The diplomacy for science is mainly about the facilitation of scientific cooperation, and collaboration, which is quite usual, and is what Horizon 2020 does, for instance. Science and diplomacy, the roles are reversed. Here, the scientists are trying to support foreign policy. And science for diplomacy goes one step further, is used to better the relations among states when there are conflicts. And there are conflicts very often. And let me put you two examples. You know that Turkey has been a candidate to be for the EU for at least the last 35 years. There are 35 items that need to be negotiated between Turkey and the EU. Only one has achieved the outcome, is finished, which is signed. All the other 34 are pending. And this is just an example. Sesame, which is this cyclotron which exists in Jordan, is probably one of the few infrastructures in which, and you know much better than myself, those from the Union for the Mediterranean, that this is one of the few infrastructures in which Israelis and Jordans and Iranians and Arabians and Egyptians work together at the same place using the same machine. Next. So, in practice, what is science diplomacy? Well, science can help to build policies. There is the Montreal Protocol, you know about the ozone layer, the IPCC on the climate change, you know that it has, scientists have shown that this is a very serious problem that we need to address collectively. And what, I mean, I'm not saying that science will solve the issue, because the issue is not solved, but at least scientists have brought to the table which are the main issues, or which are the evidences for that problem that certainly is very difficult to tackle and we are still not doing almost nothing. 2030, the agenda of the for sustainable development, you know that, well, this is the Sustainable Development Goals that also the basis is the scientific evidence that on what the problems, the main problems we have in the world, and how we can, or the goals that we can reasonably expect by 2030. The Belmont Forum, the Global Health Observation, etc., I will not go into that. But those are examples when science helps to shape a policy. Next. Here are examples of good cooperation, and in Europe we are pretty good at that. We have Euratom, we have CERN, we have the European Space Agency. I mean, those are EMBL, you name it. I mean, all these organizations in which countries get together to make a step forward on this. And again, the example of Sesame I already mentioned. Next, please. And then in the third example are the commons. So when there are no clear governance of some spaces, then what starts the understanding is scientific approaches. And here I mention the Antarctic, which is, as you know, there are many countries claiming the ownership of the Antarctic, but the only thing that really works there are scientists that are working together to do many things, and they do it together. Same, I put here the example of Internet, because I think that the main success of Internet is that it's owned by no one, and therefore that all of us have access to it, and it's the best tool we have to cooperate, not just in science, but on everything. But it started thanks to scientists who have to work together. And I put here oceans, because it's a clear common that we should also start thinking of having a common agreement on how we preserve oceans, which is a very difficult issue that we have on the table. Next, please. So I finish with this one, because I will not go into the recommendations at this stage, but those are EU tools that we have in the EU. So Horizon 2020, but also you know that there are many countries that are associated to it. Probably we'll have the UK in the next coming years associated to us as well. We have international agreements, bilateral and multilateral. We are participating in international activities, and there are plenty of examples of this. We have science counselors in the embassies, and I think that Melchor will talk about that in his video later on, so I will not talk about it. And we have the foundation in which I'm working currently, PRIMA, which is a clear example of a cooperation among different countries that also some of them are in conflict and working together to do research and innovation. So there are plenty of activities. But I want to finish with this message. When there are conflicts, and conflicts are plenty of them in the world, one way to start breaking the ice or breaking the fire is through science. And this has been shown in the past that it works, and we scientists have the responsibility to keep a common language, a common approach based on what I said, ethical neutrality, based on reason, on evidence, and trying to understand each other, having a universal and common language. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Octavi, for this really excellent introduction to science diplomacy. I think he set a perfect ground to this roundtable discussion, really explaining the topic in a perfect manner. I've seen many presentations about the issue, but I think it's now more or less clear for you why science can be used as an important tool as an important diplomatic tool. Before we continue to the next speaker, Crisal,
What?
you want to wake up the audience?
Sure.
No, not wake it up. Keep it awake. Keep it awake. You saw now the definitions of science diplomacy, and it's cut again.
While Yoran prepare the next slide, I will.
Exactly.
I would like to add something. These papers are also for you to express. If you feel strongly like you agree with something that it's been said, you can take this one, the green, and put it up. If you think, oh my God, what he's talking about, you can do this. If you have a very, very urgent question, something like really cannot wait till the end, we will have time later for questions, you can put this up. And this one is for fun, to do paper, poems, whatever you want. So, now. Okay, in which type of science diplomacy would you like to deepen today, that we have this opportunity? Science for diplomacy, scientific cooperation improving international relations. We will have the blue for this. Diplomacy for science, diplomacy facilitating international scientific cooperation. We have the green. Science in diplomacy, scientific advice to inform support foreign policy objective, the yellow, or all of them. You are universal. I knew this before. Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So we will try to make you enjoy after your question, your replies.
Perfect, thanks. So yeah, there's broad interest, as you see, speakers, and we're going to now go into details how UNESCO challenges science diplomacy. Then we go into Catalonia, and then also talk in more details about the foundation of Octavi, where Octavi is working, PRIMA for Med. So UNESCO, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
I'm starting your presentation meanwhile.
Yes. First of all, do you know that the S of UNESCO is science? Because UNESCO is known around the world for the cultural heritage. Can you hear me? Better. UNESCO is known around the world for cultural heritage. But when I say that I'm a medical doctor by background and I work in the natural science sector, people say, what? And yes, the S of UNESCO is science, and the natural science sector has been working in science diplomacy since the beginning of the creation of the organization. As I probably know, the motto of UNESCO is that as war starts in the mind of men and women, is in the mind of men and women that we have to build the defenses of peace, and this is through education, through science, and through culture. I like to describe the science diplomacy as a recent concept for an old practice. Actually, science diplomacy has been existing since ever. And we can take example like the Suez Channel or other engineering or technological scientific cooperation that were creating a common space to create diplomacy between the different states in the world, different countries in the world. The concept has been recently brought to attention by the Americans, as always, that, and actually the mecca of science diplomacy nowadays is the AAAS, that is the publisher of science. They have also a quarterly called Science Diplomacy, and they decided to create the theory of science diplomacy. UNESCO has been following this initiative and also through the help of the European Union that through Commissioner Moedas has been strongly motivated to put Europe at the center of this debate on science diplomacy. You can, sorry, this is the definition that you had. already and very well explained, so I mean I will just skip this definition. Even this, I mean, it's what we say, science has no borders. There are some called apocalyptic imagination about threatening around the world on topics like climate change, infectious disease, energy security, and migration, and other things that need science as a tool for to work, to debate, to find solution on that. Next slide. And UNESCO has been awarded in 2016 for his action in science diplomacy, and I will tell you that some of the examples that has been done before are related to UNESCO's activity since its inception in the 50s. Next slide. That's why UNESCO has 3 elements that confers to the organization this role in science diplomacy: the legitimacy, has 70 years of experience in promoting international cooperation in science, the credibility, and some of the examples done are Sesame and CERN, that are centers created under the auspices of UNESCO at the beginning. Now they are organization by themselves with their own capacity and their organization, but created through UNESCO. And universality. UNESCO has 194 member states, and a wide range of networks, scientific networks, diplomatic networks. We have our member states inside the house because we are in very close contact with the permanent delegation that are the representative of the member states in the organization. And at the same time, we have around the world the national commissions that are the institution inside the countries dealing with UNESCO affairs. Please, next one. So just to tell you that CERN in the 50s created to create peace, I mean to rebuild the peace through science after the Second World War in Europe. It has been created under the auspices of UNESCO, so let's go quicker. Then there are other centers, Sesame, same thing, and this is a very, I would say, important example of science for diplomacy. So the relationship between these countries that you know are in very tense relationship, like, or not at all, like the Palestinian Authority, Iran, Israel, and other countries in the Middle East have been working together for science, for the synchrotron light. And then we have other centers that depends from UNESCO, that more directly depends from UNESCO, like the Abdul Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics that is in Trieste, and the World Academy of Science that is also in Trieste. And why Trieste? Because Trieste, as you probably know from the history of the Second World War, was a city that remained in a limbo of being part of the West and the East, because it was part of the Italian kingdom, but after the Second World War, it was under the administration of the Allies, and just in 1952 was back to Italy as an example of the border between the division of the world at that time. Trieste was awarded, I would say, with the creation of international centers to promote peace and collaboration. Credibility. The credibility of UNESCO is associated to the experience, as I said, even if, unfortunately, as I mentioned at the beginning, the S of UNESCO is not so known, and the fact that Sesame, CERN, and other global initiative in science diplomacy are not known as initiative of UNESCO, I can assure you that the activities of UNESCO are completely integrated in very big historical institutions that now are completely autonomous, but under the collaboration of UNESCO. You can go ahead. Sesame. Next. Then it's important to describe that the work of the organization is structured in international programs. We have in the natural science sector the International Hydrological Program, the Men and the Biosphere Program, the International Geoscience and Geoparks Program, the International Basic Science Program, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. These are programs in which all the member states are sitting together to discuss and create solutions for the specific topic of some specific scientific topic related to these programs. And there is a very large interest in all these programs about science diplomacy, and I will make you some example. Next slide. Like, for example, in the hydrological, International Hydrological Program, there is an activity on water around the world in different aspects, especially the fact that water is often shared by borders countries that don't have any, that have conflictive relationship or no relationship. And UNESCO has been involved in training conflict management for water, and also in another project that is the Biopal project on the Lake Chad Basin. That is a very important resource of many countries in Africa, as the Cameroon, Chad, the Central African Republic, Nigeria. And it's also extremely important to promote, maintain the hydrological, biological, and cultural resources of this lake. And this program has putting together these countries and creating a common space, common culture on that is an application science diplomacy. Universality, as I said, UNESCO is next slide. UNESCO universality is linked to the wide range of connections of UNESCO networks. UNESCO is part of the UN system, so we are a specialized agency that deals with this topic. And actually, we have the mandate of UNESCO is the largest mandate on the UN system, because the specialized agency like the health, the WHO or the FAO, they have specific mandate on specific topic. UNESCO is putting together science, culture, education, social sciences, communication and information. So it's a very, very large range of topics. UNESCO is also associated with a lot of non-governmental organizations that are associated or in consultation with UNESCO. The private sector, you probably know that the most famous cooperation between UNESCO and the private sector is the UNESCO L'Oreal Prize for Women in Science. We have a network of goodwill ambassadors. I think one Spanish, known goodwill ambassador is the husband of the Princess of Bulgaria, and I don't remember his name now. And he's quite famous in Spain. I don't remember his name now, but is an explorer, and there are a lot of very prominent personalities that are spreading the message of UNESCO around the world thanks to their position. Then I will talk about INSIDE. That is the project that I'm leading in the natural science sector. It's actually the largest program on science diplomacy. And for all these reasons that I mentioned, credibility, legitimacy, universality, the UNESCO was involved in the draft of this project 1.5 years ago. And we have been working together. The project has started in January. It is coordinated by the CNRS in Paris. And we have 13 partners, the University of Padova, of Athens, of Lisbon, and a lot of other institutions around Europe. The project is based on the idea that the Commissioner Moedas has strongly promoted that we don't have to be beyond. I mean, we don't have to be less than the US in this field, so we have to create a European science diplomacy, and constructing a European science diplomacy is a very difficult goal because, as you know, Europe is quite divided in many fields, and science is one of these fields. So the experience of the deep and great experience of Europe in science diplomacy is an experience that is fragmented and underused. The idea of the project is to, through a rigorous historical research, create the basis to define and to analyze the past of the science diplomacy in Europe, and based on this history, based on the history, to create the tools for the future, and to create toolkits, tools to be used by the member states and by the European Commission to develop a common and shared science diplomacy for Europe. The project is structured in different topics that are about security, health, environment, and there is a part of the historical research, as I said, and a part of case studies that are analyzing the current issues in this topic around Europe. I think
Perfect.
that's it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot to UNESCO, Casimiro, for this insight into what UNESCO is doing. And we will surely also come back to this last point. Before we continue with Montse, short intermediate question to the speakers. First question about the Sesame. Last week there was the ESOF, the European Science Open Forum. Some of you may know it. It's a huge congress. It took place in Toulouse, where there are a lot of topics at the interface between science and society, science and politics, science and economy. And there was one session of Sesame. So I was there, I went into the session, they presented actually the scientific results of Sesame. So Sesame is this particle accelerator located in Jordani, and where you have a lot of researchers working together from the Middle East. And this 1 hour presentation, I hope they will show us how they made peace in this, using this particle accelerator. However, it was 1 hour of presentation on how they analyze nanoparticles with the synchrotron. So I was a bit bored, and at the end I asked a question. I think this is now my question also to the panel. I asked them, so are you overwhelmed by this responsibility as a researcher to be like an example for science diplomacy? So you are going to work, you do your research, you analyze your nanoparticles, but at the same time you have to do peace, you have to actively collaborate actively with the other researchers, and you are the ambassador for your country. However, you only want to get to your synchrotron and get your results, and that's it. And I think that's the same for many researchers here. So how do you go on with this challenge to be both like a diplomat and a scientist? At the end, there are many like us, also scientists. And the answer of the person working at the Sesame was that for them, the most important issue is scientific excellence. And the rest comes then as a next step. So they don't really care about those diplomacy or interaction between people from different regions, but they care about science. Diplomacy, peacemaking comes next automatically, because you anyway work together in the night shifts, in synchrotron, you try to share food and so on. So how do you deal with this? How do you see this? Because we are talking earlier, in those roundtable discussions, science diplomacy, creating peace, etc. But at the end, it's researcher, they have to provide scientific results, excellency, but at the same time they have to be ambassadors. So where's the balance between your role as a researcher and your role as an international person trying to create peace, representing your country? So Octavi has an answer.
Yes. Do you know which is the program that probably the most successful to build Europe? Erasmus. And Erasmus, students couldn't care less about diplomacy, And yet, they are building Europe. They are used to know how students in other countries work, which is the culture of other countries, and which is the way people work and think, live, and understand. So what we mean by science diplomacy is exactly this. It's not that these scientists do a role of ambassadors of any kind, but the fact that they work together with a common language. I mean, this dispels many of thoughts and feelings and beliefs that have simply no ground. And the best way to avoid conflicts, at least, and here we have a very good example very close to us, is that we talk much more to each other so that we understand how the others think and feel, and we travel a lot. And the same way that Erasmus works, I think we should do it with mobility of researchers, not just across Europe, but in countries in which there are conflicts, and trying to make people understand and perceive and the feelings that they all have, but that in the end they see that they can work together, and if they can work together in science, why not in many other things? And this is the approach I think that is good in science diplomacy. It's much easier for scientists to work together, and the fact that they communicate and they are with each other, I think that this creates at least the basis for some understanding.
I partially agree that it's absolutely true that the fact that they don't think about diplomacy but they can travel make them closer. But it's also, as I said, I think that that the scientific firmament is it's a tool to create good citizens, and so it's not just the fact that they are talking about physics or biology together, but I think that a scientific background can create better citizens and create so peaceful citizens, in my opinion.
Montse, you want to comment on this? Or?
Just another thing to add, maybe, is how scientific background or scientific literacy at the end of the day, because it's both useful in this sense, can fight against this pseudosciences dragon that we are facing every day, because I think that science can be considered an opinion, and I would talk about that later in my speech. So it helps also being a scientist or being a researcher helps also provide this idea that there are some things that can be treated equally as an opinion. And this already makes makes think people and provides these ideas.
Perfect. This was an intermediate question. I think before we continue the next presentation, let's keep this session interactive. Are there any questions now to the first two talks that you want to have answered here? Octavi will have to leave earlier at 8 o'clock, so if you have an urgent question also to Octavi, to his topic, please ask it now. And otherwise, if there's no, I propose in any case, Octavi, before Montse starts, in order you still get this piece of information released before you release the place. Tell us quickly more about the PRIMA initiative, which you are directing and which is located here in Barcelona in Zona Universitaria. Some words to this initiative and why it's also considered as a science diplomacy initiative. Maybe also why is it located in Barcelona?
Well, PRIMA stands for Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean Area, just to put the A, but otherwise it would have been PRIM, and which, by the way, is a good name both in German, in Italian, in Andalusia means someone very close to you, etc., etc. So has playing with the names, but I think that is good that it was a good name, and I was not the author, I had nothing to do with it. It gathers 19 countries around the Mediterranean. Well, perfectly speaking, it's 17 around the Mediterranean, all the Mediterranean except Libya, plus a country that you would guess that always is there when there is European money, which is called Germany. Maybe it sounds you familiar. And also Luxembourg. I never understood why, and in fact they don't participate at all. But these 19 countries put money by themselves, and it's fresh money, at the, 274 million, these countries, all of them contribute with money, and then the European Commission through the Horizon puts another 220. So all in all, it's 500 million, and we do calls every year in which every project, that is every application and proposal, we publish the call with some topics that are on water, agriculture, and food, and then we receive applications answering to these calls there are 3 sections, forget about the technicalities, but the important thing is that all proposals need to have at least 3 partners, of which one is from the north of the Mediterranean, one from the south of the Mediterranean, and the third one can be, both north or south, no matter. So it looks like very much Horizon 2020 projects. The projects are smaller because there are between 1 and 2 million. So the minimum is 1 million and the maximum is 2 million. But otherwise would have, many problems of success rate. In fact, for the first year, we received almost 1,000 proposals. So we closed, the deadline was in May, so we did the evaluations in April, March and April, we do the evaluations. We have done the evaluations for the first stage. We received, as I said, almost 1,000, which means a success rate of 4%, which is not much. And then for the second stage, we go to, we ensure that we'll have a success rate that is full proposals, we'll have a success rate of 30%. So of the projects that have been selected to go to the second stage, we'll have a success rate of 30%. We are in Barcelona because UFM is in Barcelona, so Spain...
The Union for the Mediterranean.
UFM, Union for the Mediterranean, is in Barcelona, so Spain offered to host this, the Secretariat in Barcelona, because Union for the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, El Palau de Pedralbes, where we were supposed to be hosted, is not ready, to say the least. So we moved very close to another place that has been offered by the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And we are just starting with the staff. So we've been publishing and receiving and selecting staff, which will start in the next coming weeks, in the next couple of weeks. And but I want to keep the staff very low, so to be minimum number of staff and to be able to be very flexible.
So short question to the science diplomacy of this project.
The science diplomacy of the project stands that we have countries that are not the best friends in the world, including Israel and, for instance, Lebanon, and Tunisia and Jordan and so on and so forth. So this is not easy. I would completely lie to you if I would tell you that things run very smoothly. No. This is difficult.
Some anecdotes? Do you have some anecdotes, some stories?
I have anecdotes that, for instance, Lebanon forbids formally any researchers to be in the same project in which Israelis are in. And this is also not that formally, but also pretty much the case for Tunisia. So, and this is not easy, and it's not easy the relationship between the Europeans and the non-Europeans. This is not easy because we are from very different cultures, and even in science it's not that easy to cooperate. But I must say, again, and this is just to underline my thesis, that among scientists the relationship is much easier than at the political level. So the political level is much tougher, the relationship is more difficult, whereas at the scientific level things run pretty smoothly. So I think that this shows that starting by science, some conflicts not will be solved, but at least science may contribute to make things easier, to smooth the relationships between two countries or societies that do not work well together. Let's
Perfect.
put it this way.
Thanks a lot. Do you have any specific question to PRIMA? You know, it's in Barcelona. You can take the metro and surely ask any other questions. So it's good to know that we have such an initiative here. Also together with the Union for Mediterranean, we have some representatives here working in water diplomacy. So also later in the networking apero, don't miss the opportunity to exchange some ideas. Next we'll go, we have good news. This guy, he's in the taxi and will be here in 15 minutes. So huge applause when he, oh, is he already here? One question? Sorry.
Yeah.
You have a micro? Perfect.
Yeah, I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, it's working.
Seems like.
What's your name and where are you from? And then your question, please.
I'm Mikhail. I'm from Russia. I'm scientist, software developer. And you told about scientists and how they make world better, how they open to all sorts of other opinion, how collaboration between them helps society, helps humanity. But if you take as example Nazi Germany, and we can take some pretty brilliant scientists like Planck, I'm not sure about Heisenberg. You can put Mengele in this list. They were collaborating between wars. They was doing all this stuff. And another thing is that no one cares about what scientists think. What could you say about this? Well, just my opinion.
Was the question clear? Yeah. The question was clear? Yeah.
Not to me.
Maybe in short, the question that you want to get, and then Casimiro will answer.
Yeah, but
Cares about what scientists.
yeah, the scientists, they was for thousands of years. They were collaborating for thousands of years. What have changed recently that would make them, give them chance to change something?
If I can answer, you mentioned bad scientists. You mentioned Mengele. I mean, there are people that are bad, but that's not a reason not to be a scientist. There are bad and good people everywhere. So the fact that the scientist is a crazy martyr, it doesn't mean that makes science a wrong tool for peace. There's no association to the individuality of someone that is bad. You have diplomats that are made to be peaceful, and then you have diplomats that have been creating the worst war in the world. So that's a singular example of bad people. And second, politicians, they don't understand science. You're totally right. That's why now the idea of creating what I was saying before, building a peace in the mind of men and women through science, it means that you don't need to be closed in a lab if you're a scientist. You can go to politics and you can change the environment. So this categorization of the field, the politics and the technicians, it's wrong, and it's the fact, and that creates the reality that you mentioned. There is, they don't speak the same language, they don't understand itself. So the idea is to create science diplomats, or that means diplomats in science, or scientists in diplomacy.
And some concrete examples we'll hear from Lorenzo, which will come soon in 15 minutes, which the Spanish embassy, for example, in London is doing, or Spain in general.
In fact, they are training diplomats. But just to add one thing, most of the conflicts among countries have a lot to do with identity. This is something that we see pretty often. And yet we know that science can bring a lot of light to this issue of identity and realize that, in fact, differences are not as they are perceived, what science can tell. I'm not saying that this will completely change the feelings, but the issue of identity has a lot to do with feelings, and science can at least provide evidence of something different, of what is the feelings and the common perception that is nurtured by whoever. But I think that there is a big room for this, but I'll stop here.
Yeah, I think I will answer partly this question in my presentation, because I address the subject of the difficulty of languages between politicians and scientists. And we have to understand the different processes that drive science and that drives the one that drives politics. And despite, it seems, and I agree, I partly agree that scientists are not listened to the extent that they should. This is more now than probably before because of the evidence-based policies that we're putting in place. But this is just a remark on it. Should I go?
So, off you go.
Okay. So again, thank you very much for inviting us, or for inviting me to a debate on that subject, which I think it's as I see and as we mentioned, is really relevant. And I started with two elements in this slide, which is the soft power of science. I like to mention it that way. And also with this image that I love science, because this is what it's about, and this is a tool we are using for these diplomacy activities. The soft power, this is an idea that this is not mine. I mean, it's not the first time it's used, of course. It's been used, it was used previously also by the president of the Barack Obama, President Obama Council. So already in the US, the idea of science used as a diplomacy tool was implemented at the time. Now we will see that in the agenda for science diplomacy, this is the pulling back that the current president of the United States is imposing. So this is already a lot of work to do for science diplomacy. It's been also used in the Insight project that you mentioned. It's also used in that site, and I will mention later. So that's why I start this way. And do you think I can just? You have over there, Armando. Yeah, I can do that by myself.
You can.
Yeah. So I like to use. I mean, this is when science meets international relations. This is where the soft power of science emerges, and this is maybe a 21st century name for a practice, for an habit, for an old practice already. So this is a little bit what you mentioned. And I will go probably through some of the ideas that already Octavi mentioned, but I like to mention them before starting to explain what we do from the Catalan government on that side. So the three ideas are science is a global asset, we know that, and its advancement is global. And it's good to recall it because science is global, but we use it locally with the local rules. So it's not the same having a shop, for example, in Paseo de Gracia, and competing this shop with the shops that are in Paseo de Gracia or in other streets in Barcelona. They may be under the same rules, and rules that may be different to some shops in Champs-Élysées, for example. And it's good because they compete to each other. But when we compete in the international arena on scientific activities, and we are under local rules, this is something that also is a burden sometimes or helps sometimes to advance. So science is global and should be ruled under global rules. And I think this is important to mention because sometimes we see that the advancement of science is affected by that idea. The second, that scientists are among the best considered professional group. This is also a fact for some countries. We have a survey conducted for a Catalan population and it's so. We will see a comparison in the next slide. And the challenges are common, and so solutions should be common, and science has to be used to address them. So the idea that science knows no country is not new, but it's always good to recall it for some good names to recall it. Science is a global asset, and already we saw some hints on that side, but those are nice pictures. This one is between 2000 and 2013, the percentage of international collaborations. Authors from, sorry for the misspelling, different countries went from 13% to 20%. This is something that Nature expressed in a report on 2016. And those lights reflect the collaboration, the scientific collaborations between 2005 and 2009 in all the world. And you see that all countries collaborate to each other. So this is also, of course, there are some hotspots, but at least you see more or less the silhouette of the countries that are collaborating. And also something that has also been mentioned, when you increase, every time you increase one author in terms of international collaboration, the impact is higher. This is something that the Royal Society published in 2011, but is also valid at that time. This is just a current image that has been published also in Nature. It shows the collaboration between different countries, and you see, of course, that the United States has a large amount of collaborations, but the different countries already have their participation in the different areas, in the different world areas, of course. So collaboration is international, and there's no much burden on that, and open countries have more impact. And look, for example, the case of Switzerland. It means that the level of openness is huge. Of course, the amount, the scientific production can't be as large as other countries like, for example, Japan or Greece, but the impact is higher because of its openness. So this is also something good in terms of, it's an opportunity for science to interact with other countries, so in science diplomacy is there, has a place there, of course, and also gives a hint on the values of the country. So scientists are among the best considered professional group. And here you have two surveys. The first one on the left is conducted on the Catalan population, which is the professional group. So we are the third here, scientists. Nice to see that military people, well, army is at the bottom. Here you have the US survey, then the military army are on top, but then scientists are well located also. So scientists imply trust. So people trust scientists is in terms of reliability, and this is something that is good for science diplomacy as well. And again, the third assessment I said is that challenges are common, science is needed to address them. And It's been said in different places. For example, in Montevideo, his UNESCO paper, here is mentioned Science for Sustainable Development. So the different sustainable development goals can be addressed by science. So that's a fact as well. And this is why now with these agendas on the table, scientists are more listened maybe than ever. And so what happened here? Oh no, yeah. Well, this is supposedly, because this is a little bit what happened from 1990 with the climate change first warnings. That guy is already getting very tired of saying the same thing year after year. And is anybody there? Tap, tap, tap. So is this thing working? So nobody listens to him. So this is one of the perversions of listening to scientists, because we get used to their recommendations and they're not put in place. And this is because the political process is complex. And then we see that the scientific input is important for us because we provide the data that are used for that. But the political input takes into consideration public opinion, advocacy that comes from different groups, different analysts, and everything all together makes a complex process that at the end of the day, we have to make sure that science has a relevant position in there, but it's not assured. So maybe Yoran recalls that from another talk we had, but it's, this is something that Nature published, and then The Guardian also gathered. And it's nice to look at this because there's 20 things that politicians need to know about science and the 20 things that scientists need to know about policymaking. And this answers a little bit why this relationship is not always as we expect it to be. Policy decisions are subject to scrutiny. There's the public agenda, there's partisan interests, and then politicians need to know how science works. And if we provide some data, those are sustained advising.
Just one comment quickly, why you said, Yoran maybe know about it. So some of the public knows about it. We invited Montse some months ago to a SciDF bus about scientific advice. We organized a roundtable discussion about scientific advice. If you missed it, there is the video online. So go on the YouTube channel of Scientist Dating Forum, and there we have actually the entire debate as a video, how scientific advice works in the world, also in the region here in Catalonia, just as a small comment.
Thank you. So, like we said, solutions can come if we work alone, and that sends us back to collaboration and to trust. So, it's my first three statements. And the example of Erasmus mobility is an example of how to work this trust between academic and research institutions all over the world. In this scenario, science diplomacy is not only necessary, but it's one of the most important activities to be accomplished, and is a means to express values. For example, which model of country you look for to be a partner of, to participate in a collaboration project, or who you like to approach to, or like Casimiro mentioned, the Unesco L'Oreal program to tackle the gender imbalances. This is something that you can put in place in your institutions, and we do that in our research institutions in Catalonia. Also, we promote, and now I just am trying to introduce a little bit what we do on that regard. We promote the HRS4R, which means the Human Resources Strategy for Researchers, which is a label of quality for human researches strategy, human resources strategy, and most of our organizations, most of our institutions try to get this label from the European Commission. So this is also that talks about your values, and when you position in that sense, it's already a position of the country. So I think we have. So the means to accomplish this, someone mentioned those, are bilateral or multilateral science and technology cooperation agreements, and we do that, for example, at the Secretariat for Universities and Research, try to provide content to these agreements that already exist at the Department for External Affairs in Catalonia. So we have different agreements, different networks with regions in Europe or with other countries, and we provide with specific collaboration needs on that sense. Or for example, our participation in large projects like the FET flagships or the EIT or the European Funds Attraction. Our policy, our science policy, which is flexible, open, provides competitiveness, excellence, is already a card to present yourself to the countries and say a little bit about your own values as a territory. So those are the goals, the attraction of talent, our openness to all kinds of talents from everywhere in the world, gives us figures like, for example, 60% of our iCrea researchers come from other areas in the world. So that's already a hint on what kind of society you build. And this is science diplomacy as well. So these are some of the means and the PRIMA, of course, that Octavi mentioned. And in our case, in a society, science diplomacy is also important because it is based on informed decision making. And when you have all the problems, like for example, these figures saying kids around the world face many challenges to getting immunized, and you have all those against vaccination groups, we have to be able to transmit from the scientific point of view this idea. As William Edwards Deming said, he was a US statistic researcher, he said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And this is what we have to make sure that is our philosophy in terms of diplomacy as well, because we provide those evidences for the policy making. In our case, in the government of Catalonia, at the Secretariat for Universities and Research, we are also starting to work in terms of impact assessment. And it has a lot to do with science diplomacy as well, because at the end of the day, when we work for society, when the research and innovation activities have a ultimate goal, which is improve society's welfare, health, well-being, well-being and health, and the planet and the environment, etc. So if we allocate correctly our resources with the right policies, and if we have as an outcome the reputation of our researchers, of our experts, and we can have them in the right positions to take decisions, that is also science diplomacy, and we work for that from the government as well. So we start to work to see if our research provides outcomes and an impact on society that helps us also in that regard. And also, as someone else mentioned, we are also working on open science, open innovation, the paradigm that...
1 second,
yes.
Quickly before Octavi is leaving, we can quickly make the switch with Lorenzo. And please wait, Octavi, let's make as big applause and thank you for Octavi and also for Lorenzo, and a picture. Let's do Octavi, let's do one group picture of all the speakers now that we have you all here quickly on stage. Can somebody quickly take a picture so that we one quick picture of the speakers here.
No problem, I can retake it.
Perfect. That's diplomacy. So that's the and I don't know. We're gonna directly continue with you, Montse. Sorry, but welcome to Lorenzo. After the talk of Montse, we're gonna introduce quickly to Lorenzo. I hope you're in shape. 6 hours of delay was willing. 7, yeah. You want to tell us afterwards in the apero about the story of today. Thanks to be here.
I mean, it's only 3 slides, 3 more slides. Just remember that we are not doing that alone. We are just following the indications, and we are just aligning with the policies that are coming, I mean, on the international agenda. But it goes again to the world, I mean, to the trust, that if it's open environment for science, open data, and it's trust on the scientific activities. So there's an agenda for the science diplomacy at the EU level, like we said, the projects like Insight that Casimiro mentioned, and also the recommendations for European science diplomacy. And some recommendations, it's very clear. It's just cooperate, use best practices, try to avoid inside the member states different lines that are like opposite. Let's try to work like in the good practices. That guy that wrote this recommendation is also, I mean, is a professor. I have to go back to here. He's a professor. He's got a couple of interesting reports on the science diplomacy. I will maybe add them for the participants.
Right.
Also on the US level, the problems of isolation that is appearing and the pulling out of international agreements, and also for East-West global challenges, and also it will help for relationships. So I will end with those 2 pictures. Those are 2 articles also very interesting to read. When scientists do what diplomats can't, and this is something that somebody asked about, the overwhelming responsibility of doing diplomacy activities, being a scientist, but sometimes we reach where foreign policy diplomats can't. And there's another very recent recommendation why scientists should all be diplomats, why or why not. And then there's the March for Science, you are familiar with that as well. But our activity as science diplomats is in all our activities as policymakers or as a scientist as well. And I think that's it.
Thanks a lot, Montse.
Thank you.
For this view from Catalonia, also a general view onto this topic. I like your last slide, why scientists should be diplomats, because Lorenzo will answer us. Lorenzo, you were a researcher, and now you work in the Spanish embassy in London as a scientific coordinator. Short introduction, who are you, and why are you now the scientific coordinator of the Spanish embassy in London?
So thank you, Yoran, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. I woke up early today at the crack of dawn, 5:30, 6 a.m. And unfortunately, my flight has been on a huge delay. So I have just arrived now, and I was meant to arrive at noon. Having said that, yes, my name is Lorenzo Melchor. I work for the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, FECIT, as the science coordinator at the Spanish Embassy in London. I am a PhD in molecular and cellular biology with over 13 years of experience in biomedical research in Spain, in the United States, and in the United Kingdom. And it was exactly during my postdoctoral research in London that I came to realize how important it was to connect science to public policies. And I said, okay, that should be my mission. So even though my career as a researcher was a promising one, I decided to make a career transition to ensure that people with scientific backgrounds work beyond academia to make sure that science is on top of the agenda of any kind of job, sector, institution, etc. And that's what I do at the Spanish Embassy in London. I work for FECIT, but deployed in London as the science coordinator, and I tried to make sure that any department at the Spanish Embassy has science on top of, as a top priority in their list. This is from education and culture to economics and trade, to agriculture, to infrastructures, social affairs. all those type of departments that the embassy has, I've made sure that they have developed, for the last 3 years, some activities in regards to science. But, well, I have missed some of your presentations before, and I'm sorry for that. But I would like to take this opportunity to make some differences between different concepts. One thing is science diplomacy, another thing is science policy, and another thing is international science cooperation. Science policies are those kind of policies that go in favor of funding science, human resources calls for projects, etc. Okay? International scientific cooperation is where scientists from different countries cooperate, whereas science diplomacy is more than that. Science diplomacy is that arena where scientists, diplomats, and policymakers all gather together to find a common ground with mutual trust. I think Montse was mentioning that before, in order to improve their policy actions with scientific evidence and also for the progress of science and humankind. I don't know if you have some specific questions or I should just keep talking about the type of job that I do in London or the national strategy of science diplomacy.
Exactly. Yeah. So us interested now is specifically what Spain is doing, and also you can tell us about this program, Ambassadors for Science in London, okay. Specifically.
So I will start from the top to the small parts, okay? So the global strategy of the Spanish science diplomacy, we should say that it's a very recent action that the Spanish government has taken in this regard. And it has been focused first in building trust between the Ministry of Science and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Building trust by having annual meetings, by having open communication channels to discuss what actions should be taking place for the good of each of the ministries. Having said that, we need to take into account that science diplomacy, there are many stakeholders involved in science diplomacy. The government has a wide plethora of actors, of players doing science diplomacy there. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs with all their cultural counselors abroad, but the Ministry of Science, you have all the people working in tech transfer and international tech cooperation, like CDTI, CDTI. You've got scientific counselors in the Spanish embassy in Brussels. You've got scientific delegates from CSIC and from CRUE, also in Brussels, and many other different actors. You also have universities, research centers, companies who want to do a science diplomacy activity abroad. And also learned societies. And we could also include in here the societies of Spanish researchers abroad who are doing an excellent work at trying to build connections between Spain and the countries where they are based. So I would say that there are two innovative aspects of the Spanish national diplomacy. One is the fact that 3 years ago, the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology deployed 3 scientific coordinators to 3 embassies where there were no scientific officers before. These are Washington, D.C., Berlin, and London. And I happen to be the one in London. So these embassies which didn't have a science officer before started to have a scientific officer who had done like 40 scientific activities a year, as opposed to 2 or 1 that there were before their appointment to these embassies. Also, we have been working quite in such a network with the other stakeholders in the field, from the other people in the Spanish government to the other people in the Spanish universities, as I mentioned before, and also with the societies of Spanish researchers abroad. And this global strategy has given some good achievements. On the one hand, an expert group for the European Commissioner Carlos Moedas had mentioned that Spain, together with Switzerland, are two countries that are innovating in the field of science diplomacy and that have a national global strategy to carry out this activity. Second, some of the programs that we have developed, for instance, Ambassadors for Science, which I will be talking about in a couple of seconds, had been recognized as good and innovative shadowing schemes to connect scientists to policymakers and diplomats. And third, we have positioned ourselves as good stakeholders in training science diplomats through scientific courses that we have run in Italy, in South America, and now we are part of an European consortium, one of the only 3 European consortiums that are studying science diplomacy, and we are there as practitioners. The consortium is called Science for Diplomacy for S4D4C, basically. And lastly, I go back to my actual job at the embassy. You may be wondering what this guy does at the embassy. Is he having only Ferrero Rocher? Well, I must say that I have only had one Ferrero Rocher in 3 years' time, so that's not what I do. I try to do activities that fit within 4 different categories. One is connecting countries through science. 2, it's trying to connect with scientists. Third, is trying to promote Spain as a country where you can do science. And 4, is trying to do science outreach using Spanish language. If I can briefly mention some specific examples of each of these 4 categories, I would start with the first one. How do I try to connect countries through science? Well, for instance, last summer, the King of Spain visited London, and believe me, it's quite difficult to fight to include something in a royal state visit. And we succeeded in including 2 different scientific events during the 3-4 days that they spent there. Also, whenever scientific authorities of Spain are coming to the UK, I have tried to organize a top quality agenda for our Spanish authorities to meet with British authorities in order to build up scientific opportunities for collaboration between both countries. I can say that we have also organized some scientific debates, bilateral debates, either in Spain or in the UK, in topics such as science advice, which is quite a hot topic nowadays, and also about tech transfer. I would say, in the second category, trying to connect with scientists, that the embassy, one of their big missions is trying to provide support to any Spanish citizen living in the UK. And let's be honest, Spanish scientists living in the UK also need some kind of support. So from the Spanish embassy, we have provided them with some career development workshops. We have also published some guides for them to learn the ins and outs of the British system of science and technology so that they could further progress in their career there if that's what they want to. And we have also provided support, as I mentioned before, to the Society of Spanish Researchers in the UK, SRUK, in order to ensure that they have the opportunity to meet with Spanish authorities and also for them to produce some of their fantastic scientific activities that they do. One of these programs that we do at the embassy is Ambassadors for Science. And with this one, I will finish, and if you want more examples about the third and the fourth category, I will give it later on. But Ambassadors for Science is an innovative shadowing scheme where scientists, diplomats, and other counselors spend together a week, or more than 8 days together. What they do? Well, first, they receive some kind of introductory seminars about how science works and how diplomacy works, and what's that about science diplomacy. And later on, they pay a visit to each other. Scientists go to the embassy and spend a whole day or 2 days being the shadow of these diplomats, going with them to any meeting they have, to any communication they have with Spain or with British authorities, etc. They go with them during the whole day and learn what they do. And the other way around, diplomats spend time at a university, research center, or a company, visiting their scientific couples and learning about how science works and the importance of science in today's society. So I would say that the program has been successful on the one hand because scientists has taken this opportunity to think out of the box and to check how they could influence with science the foreign policy activities of our embassy. And the other way around, diplomats in our embassy have realized the potential and the presence of Spanish scientists in the UK, and that they are very important to provide support and to give them any kind of support during the time they spend in the UK. And basically building trust, which I think is the most important thing of science diplomacy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lorenzo. Excellent work what you do at the embassy. And I think with this it's a good closure of the 4 talks about science diplomacy with concrete examples of what you can do. I propose we'll use the last 5-10 minutes to put more light in the audience. Before we start with the apéro, there will be a networking apéro afterwards. Could somebody maybe make more light in the audience? And if there are questions from the audience, you're very welcome. We know it was a long session, extremely interesting, and therefore there are some questions from the audience. Anna, could you maybe quickly put more light in the... So it will be quickly dark, I think, and then... dark, and then more light. So we have the first question here from Santi.
Yeah, thanks, Yoran. Well, I'm Santi Reyo. I'm currently working in IDIBEL Center. And after the summer, I will move for career transition for more management in Madrid. And well, it's amazing the level of the talks. It's nice to hear you. And I have a question about, a part of the dark side of science diplomacy and scientific cooperation. I'm wondering how can we improve in the problem of ethical dumping in scientific research. The European Union is increasingly aware of the problem in which part of the scientific funds that they allocate to researchers finally go to third countries by reasons of their less ethical compromises in terms about, I don't know, animal experimentation or experimentation with human embryos, etc. It's increasingly often to see laboratories in the European Union to have branches in countries such as Singapore or even the Mauritius Republic in the Indic Ocean to perform tasks, experimental tasks that are actually forbidden in the European Union. So can we address this, how to focus in which science diplomacy can also contribute to not only cooperating in science, but also to spread our values, even if not always we all share policy positions about some terms of cooperation.
Thanks.
Okay.
So how science diplomacy can be used to prevent ethical dumping, so doing some bad research abroad. Somebody?
Well, I think one of the ways is, of course, the research institutions that participate in the projects, in the competitive projects that gain these funds to research and have collaboration with other areas in the world, they have to go through a process of justification which is transparent. And so on one side, transparency must be a value that has to be put in place by the governments, but also at the European level. It is at the European level already, but we should strike on that. I mean, we should be stronger on that sense. Also, at the level of the governments, for example, in Catalonia, we are just working to have this agency linked to our government that will try to go for the ethics in research, because we have also identified that there's always some specific cases, and a government must have the tool to review it and to treat them properly. So on one side, transparency, also have the right tools, but also the same institutions that collaborate and that participate in these projects have to be, at the end of the day, accountable of their activities, and this kind of process should be at least a little bit followed and monitored. This is one idea.
Okay. Thanks, Casimiro.
Yes, I wanted to mention accountability, and it, of course, extremely important. On the other side, I think that this is the role of the multilateralism. So, organization as UNESCO, we have to create a common space of rules around the world. So there is the I participated to the committee that in UNESCO prepared the recommendation for science and scientific research that has been published in November 2017 and is voted by all member states. So national accountability, international common culture of rules.
We'll take one or two more questions. There's one question here in the front. Please don't forget the name and where you're from.
Yep. Should I stand up? Oh no. Oh.
The microphone functions?
Yep. Okay, my name is Roy Villar. Thank you for that so enlightening talk. I want to make a very short question because I have a little bit of experience in this field as the head of internationalization at BioCat, Bioregion of Catalonia. So what do you think is the role of a scientific diplomat or similar in a context when bilateral or international relationships are breaking? Let's say an example like Brexit, like some policies in the US right now. Do you think that the scientific diplomat should pursue to build up bridges, or should focus more in other countries that could raise a more, let's say, more return?
Okay, this question goes definitely to Lorenzo. He raised Brexit.
Okay. I would say that in those scenarios, science diplomats are the ones that should be acting more actively. For instance, Brexit, or in the United States, surely you have been mentioning one great example of how scientific collaborations helped to ease international tension between the United States and Cuba, because scientists started to share their information about the weather, because let's be honest, a hurricane in Cuba later on is going to be taking place in Florida. So scientists are starting to share that information, and during the Obama administration, diplomatic relationships started to become more fluent between the United States and Cuba. In regards to Brexit, science is on top of the agenda, of the political agenda. And there have been many different science policy forums about Brexit and science. And I have been invited to some of those to raise awareness about the international perspective, because sometimes this discussion is maintained between British institutions, whereas by me attending those events, I was able to provide voice to the international community that is in the UK. Also, the Society of Spanish Researchers in the UK has done an excellent job at doing many different surveys, and they are producing these surveys and giving it to the British Parliament and to the British government so that they can take better decisions. I would say that with Trump era, also science diplomacy is more needed than ever.
It's also interesting to hear maybe from UNESCO.
Later.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I go later.
Just a quick example of that is not related to Brexit, but to another Russian interesting fracture in Europe. The Commissioner Moedas is our biggest science diplomat, and actually after the sanction to Russia, the visa to scientists were not stopped. So this is an example of the work of a science diplomat.
Yeah, I wanted to mention the example of the European funds for research and innovation. The new program Horizon Europe is already working under the idea of a European Union without the UK, which will leave a huge hole in the amount of money available for research. So this has an impact on the funds available for the other countries and other areas. So this is an example of diplomacy for science. So the diplomacy has helped ease a little bit the negotiations in terms of having a lesser impact on which are the funds, which are going to be the funds available for research in the European level. Mm-hmm. So this is an example of something that we didn't mention a lot, but it's already on the table.
I would say that the United Kingdom is actually, the scientific community, British scientific community has done an excellent job at doing science diplomacy and science, providing scientific facts to the government. And this is at a time that the UK research and innovation system is having a full reshape. They are building a new research council that is going to involve all the 7 research councils that were before, Innovate UK, and another agency for higher education. And this is taking place during Brexit negotiations, and they have been able to increase the budget for science quite a lot. And they have put the target in over 2.3, 2.4% by 2024. And to do so, they are producing plenty of different scientific calls to attract and keep attracting scientific talent to the country.
Perfect. Thanks. So we're going to finish with the last very short question, please, and a short answer from you. So who are you and what's your question?
This is me. I am Ana Roig. I work at the Material Science Institute of Barcelona, and I hope the question is short. I try, okay? I am your prototypical research professor. I have a multinational, multicultural group, China, Egypt, Romania, you name it. We all travel a lot. We live in many countries. We do what we should do. We cooperate. And sometimes I imagine the scientific community like a virtual country. So to me, the scientific community moves in a different level and is an horizontal country spread all around. And I see it difficult that the permeation of that sort of cloud to the real society or to the multinational society. And I don't know, and I understand what you have explained, and I found it very interesting, but I don't know if we could translate this way of scientists as a tribe, let's say, or as a community to other communities like farmers.
Like?
Farmers.
Farmer.
So instead, maybe that's a way of permeating that might be more efficient. So all those things that we have learned, cooperation, traveling, multidisciplinary groups, can we translate to this, to a different group of society? I don't know if that's a full idea.
Okay. You understand the question?
Okay.
So I would say I agree. Science knows no borders, and scientists tend to move in a sphere with an international environment with multicultural people around, and that's basically one of the best things of science, and something that can make us be more critical with society, more open as well to other cultures and other societies. So it's not that the whole scientific community start doing science diplomacy, no, but some of scientists who have the right skills to actively engage in diplomatic summits, with foreign policy makers, with the government, etc., to try to build up a relationship of trust between science and these other spheres of societies, like diplomacy and policy, I think that should be done. I mean, it's the same as scientists with the skills to do great outreach activities and great communication skills. So it's not that all scientists should be doing science communication, but if you are the one with the right skills, go and engage with some journalists or some school or anything. So I would say that the scientific community is heterogeneous, and we need to take the most out of our heterogeneity in order to engage actively with all spheres of society. Otherwise, we are in a bubble.
Perfect. Monse?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, a couple of examples. Just a few days ago, the Barcelona Supercomputing Center celebrated an activity or a program to engage young girls from school, in the third grade, in STEM activities. So just to raise their vocation as a scientist. This is because we have a lot of work to do at the level of the education. That's one side. The other is not all scientists should communicate, should be outreachers, but there's one important tool we have as governments, as policymakers, as researchers, as organizations that perform research as well, is trying to tell which is the impact of our activities on society. And again, in that, UK goes ahead, and they have the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, and that lies on impact narratives, and researchers are obliged to explain their research from the impact narrative side. So also this helps population to understand the values of science and how science helps them. That engages the public on science as well. That's a couple of examples.
Yeah, more dating, scientist dating.
So I partially agree with both of you, because I think that these that you're mentioning are punctual things, and it's to deal the present. So you are a scientist, you have a capacities, skills in communication, so you can do that. We have to change a new generation. We have to educate. Your generation is lost, or there is just few cases that, but it's my generation is lost too. We have to educate new generation. We have to start from scratch. So we have to educate with the fundamentals of science, that science is not a bubble. We have to change the way of teaching science. We have to change the way of educating the new generation to create a scientific mentality in all the fields, in farmers, in lawyers, and everybody. So will change the future.
And in science diplomats. With this, I think we're going to close the session. It's a long session about science diplomacy. There was a lot to talk about. We even talked about Brexit. If there are any other questions, we go now for an apero, networking apero outside. First of all, before this, big applause for the speakers. We have here some Scientist Dating Forum beers. That's the traditional Scientist Dating Forum beer that we offer to the speakers, homebrewed. And yeah, she tasted already. And with this, we're gonna move slowly to the networking apero outside. So this was actually the like for me personally, the last event in Scientist Dating Forum, as some of you know. I'm defending in 2 days my PhD thesis, and then myself going to start working in science diplomacy for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And all of this started 2 years ago, Scientist Dating Forum, and here we are here tonight, like after many, many events which we realize in bars and scientific research institutes and so on. And all of this, of course, not possible without a team. All of this was a huge team effort. Even so, often maybe 1 or 2 persons are on the stage. We have many people from the team here. We have Crisal, which often helped in interacting with people with a dynamic way. We have Roger, who helped in our policy issues where we approach the politicians. Laura, who was our treasurer, who helped also with bar events. We have Vittoria, who designed the puzzle for our Fiesta la Ciencia, Iomo. We have Berta, who is designing all our posters. Laurent, who helped in bar events. We have Patricia, responsible coordinating communication. We have Anna, who is like coordinating the talks normally, so also when we're inviting speakers and so on, and many others, which I think all of them who are here tonight. Laurent, I mentioned you already, who helped with the bars. And Marta, also, who is on her tablet tweeting tonight. Also, that's the 21st century, a lot of social media. We have to be everywhere. And many who are not here tonight as well. We invite you all also to join our team. Science Dating Forum, of course, continues. We are electing a new president. More to this in some days and weeks. We'll announce it. In any case, I think it's now time that we enjoy some beers together. And after this, in half an hour, we're going to move to a restaurant that is just behind, a Greek restaurant, excellent food. Magrainer Boik or something like this. I think some of you may know it. And we're going to have a dinner there together. So let's join now to some food and drinks.